start with Refuge and a Milarepa prayer.
Page A21.
We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. Namo Guru Hasa Vajraye. You see that everything in Samsara and Nirvana is merely dependently arisen. You see the Dharmata of true being. This is the essence of all dependent arising. The power of your great insight fills the universe with auspicious light. Almighty Shepherd Dorje, please rise up now from within my heart. You see that everything in Samsara and Nirvana is merely dependently arisen. You see the Dharmata of true being. This is the essence of all dependent arising. The power of your great insight fills the universe with auspicious light. Almighty Shepherd Dorje, please rise up now from within my heart. You see that everything in Samsara and Nirvana is merely dependently arisen. You see the Dharmata of true being, that is the essence of all dependent arising. The power of your great insight fills the universe with auspicious light. Almighty Shepherd Dorje, please rise up now from within my heart. Jemila Shepherd Dorje la soa debso. 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 Lord Miller, laughing Vajra, I call to you. 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 So thank you everybody for your questions. There's another batch came out this afternoon. I already thought, how am I going to answer all those in an hour and a half? But this is an ongoing exploration, so these discussions are going to be carrying on for a long time to come, and these questions will keep coming round again and again. And there's questions at all sorts of different levels as well, aren't there? So some of them relate more directly to what Dashi was talking about, and some of them are more general. But all of them are sort of revolving around the kind of questions that we're trying to clarify by means of this study program on these basic teachings of the Buddha that you find in the early sutras and all the way through Buddhism, really. So I thought I'd begin maybe with the verse we just sang, because some questions arise out of that. I've always been intrigued by this idea of this dharmas of samsara and nirvana. How are we defining dharmas then, if nirvana is also dharmas? And there's a lot of history behind that. You have to realise that terminology has slid around over the centuries, and you have to keep an eye on that. That dharmas isn't used in a consistent way, really. So within any particular context, you have to look to see how this term is being used. This is partly what Dashi was talking about when he was talking about all dharmas. Like what's included in all dharmas, which has been a discussion within the commentarial tradition since, way back when they were creating the Abhidharma and, deciding how they were going to present Dharma after the Buddha had passed away. So don't be surprised if you find some things seem inconsistent. It's worth asking what's going on, because the way it's used in the early sutras, the way Buddha was using nirvana, well, it's opposite of the world. The world is what's suffering and confused, and nirvana is cessation of suffering. It's the cessation of the world. There isn't then, you've seen through the suffering and now you see reality as it is. And the Buddha doesn't say an awful lot about that. It's demonstrated in the stories of his life. It's demonstrated in passing remarks that he makes. But he's very clear, I'm only teaching suffering and the cessation of suffering. When you realise the cessation of suffering, you'll realise what a Buddha realises. So, don't need to speculate about that in advance. And with the Buddha there, radiant with all his, the splendour of his presence, that's quite convincing in itself. Whereas I think sometimes we need a little bit more help in even trying to conceive of what it might be that we're aiming for. What would be the result of the cessation of suffering? Would it just be nothing, Do we really want that? So I think talking about it is helpful in order to uplift us and get us to that state where we have this faith, this sort of thing that Dashi was talking about this morning, a sense of right at the beginning, this sort of joyfulness of, there is some hope, there is some inspiration here, there is something that, to carry me forward, which then is the basis for shamatha to arise, that your mind can become settled because it's kind of going somewhere. It's kind of got that sense of going somewhere. But all those things that Dashi was talking about this morning, all those from the Upadisa Sutta and the other sutras that he was sort of connecting them and showing how the different teachings fit together. We need to look at all of that in detail because it does relate to our experience. It's all immediate and about our experience. And that was the point I was making. I really woke up with this morning that actually Paticca Samuppada is our immediate experience, how it this is what Dashi was saying as well. It's like, there it is, it's all of a piece. It's like a mandala that's just suddenly popped up. I didn't see reality as it was, and then suddenly I was in this mandala of suffering, and it's all of a piece. Once there's a vidya, then that's the mandala that appears, and there's this interesting. Each of those stages, each of those elements, if you like, within that mandala are interesting to look at in our immediate experience. In the Mahamudra tradition, we just get to the point where we can settle in the sense of the spaciousness of our awareness and then look as thoughts appear. Where do they appear? Where are they? How do they appear? What is a thought? Just really homing in on that, which is no different than in the Satipatthana, where you're looking, where sort of inwardly, outwardly, arising, ceasing. Do they arise or cease? Is there an inside, outside? Kind of really homing in on your immediate experience. And these 12 links are very much about that, and the immediacy of when you see suffering, really, that's when it collapses. And that as Queen Shrimala Devi says, the reason Shravikas don't realize the dhatu, the true nature of the Dharmata, is because they don't really understand suffering. They've interpreted it at too superficial a level. If you really get to the depths of suffering and how all-pervasive it is, at that point you can see how that whole concoctation of that whole mandala, really, of different elements is sort of created that world of suffering. And the only way you're going to step out of it is to step out of that mandala altogether. It's like with mandala principle, you step out through seeing. When you see it for what it is, it collapses because it's based on avidya. The whole mandala is based on avidya. So everything within it is feeding avidya. And your avidya is keeping it together. When you see, the avidya collapses, the whole mandala collapses. So it's like going out through the centre, really. Rather than chipping away at the edges, you kind of just go for it. Very immediate, very direct. No before, no after, no time, no place. Just cut through everything. It's like really just cut through, which is what pointing out instructions in the Mahamudra and the Dzogchen tradition are aiming to do. Just cut straight through. It's dead in line. So yes, there's the Dharmata of true being, which is what you see. When you see, when there's no avidya doesn't see that, vidya does see that, and so it's like you in Dzogchen they call it vidya, they call it rigpa, but in the Mahamudra they tend to call it mind, sem, chitta. It's all the same. Buddha nature, Dharmata. When you see the true nature, then that's when it all collapses and auspiciousness fills the whole universe. Like Kondanya sees, the whole earth shakes. It affects the whole universe because it's all hanging together. All our different mandalas are all hanging together. So when one of them goes, pop, then the others all go, woo, everything wobbles. I think that's I love that idea. It immediately kind of gives me a sense of uplift and hopefulness. So the idea is that the enlightened beings, the power of their insight is actually penetrating us all the time, but we're resisting. I don't want to wake up. I'm not going to. Leave me alone. And this auspiciousness, we don't really have a word like it in English, really. I suspect the word in Tibetan was tashi, but it's related to the word nidana, related to the term. In Tibetan we say tendrel, connections, literally connections, really. This is one of the questions that came up. Well, what are these connections that we talk about that are auspicious? And I think that's a really, really good question. It's not asked enough, I think, but because obviously something like that has to be true, doesn't it? If these perceptions that we have are within the cycle of suffering, if that's all based on avidya, when you remove the avidya, what's there then? It's not a blank. Like in Trusting the Heart of Buddhism, we've got, what reality that we discover that it does have structure, it does have this emotionality or passion or feel to it, it does have the possibility of manifestation or non-manifestation. What's the fourth one? It's obvious, but I've forgotten. Structure dynamic, that's right. It does have a dynamic, it isn't static, it isn't. So it's a living reality, it is the reality of life itself. That we can't see that in its fullness because of our vidya, and you could say the Buddha is that. So the Buddha's knowledge of that is direct, because there's no breaking up into some separate Buddha separate from the whole of reality. And auspiciousness is like that reality, the structure and dynamic of that reality that could be manifest or not manifest. It's beyond anything we could break up into bits and sort of think, oh, well, this is this and this is that, and, it all fits together like that. That's all done conceptually. But what is it that we're conceptualizing about? It's a reality that's non-conceptual by definition. It's like conceptualizing is like trying to talk about something that is there, but you're just talking about it or thinking about it, but it's not the thing itself. So the thing itself is good in itself. It only gets bad when there's a vidya there. So as long as when there's vidya, then everything's auspicious in the sense that anything that's manifesting is a sign or a symbol of some, I suppose you could say, a Buddha quality, or a quality of the nature of reality that is actually, like perfect. If you use Dzogchen term, it's complete and perfect. It's beyond anything that needs any further anything else done to it. It's complete in itself. It's self-liberated. It's just enjoying itself. It's just like So when there's connections, I think the best, where we understand this best, and I say this, I think every time I give a talk, where we understand this best is when we talk about the heart. Just the way we talk about it, not the way, we just talk about, or just sense. You can sense another person in your heart, like when we started that verse, Milarepa, I call Milarepa in my heart. Please rise up now in my heart. Which is nonsense in some ways, isn't it? You could say, what? What are you talking about? But somehow we bypass all of that thinking. We have an intuitive sense of meaning there that's before concepts, actually. We say, rise up now within my heart, and before we conceptualize it, it means something. And as soon as we conceptualize it, we could argue it doesn't mean anything. We could say, well, what does that mean? But actually, strangely makes some sense. Milarepa, please rise up now within my heart. That's when you can use words like interpenetration, like Milarepa or Shakyamuni or Guru Rinpoche or Khenpo Rinpoche or my best friend or anybody. They're in my heart. And I can relate to them in that way. That there's some alive opening up from that place. I can live that. It's not like you're not blocked. You're just kind of, I can live that. I can live like that. I can live like with Milarepa in my heart. I don't. I forget immediately. but at the moment that you say it, it's almost like reconnecting with something. Oh, I'm going to hold you in my heart. I won't forget you. Sort of like you'll be with. I'll be with you. You'll be with me. That kind of talk is auspicious. It's talking about real connections. And so one of the questions was about conditions. When we talk about dependent origination, it's like all conditions coming together, and it's all about conditionality. So how does that relate to connectedness? And this is what interests me a lot, actually. Like when you talk about the samskaras, there's so many different translations for what they might be, because actually it's all that there is in the end. Our whole world is through avidya. We have these samskaras, these formations. When there's no avidya, if the formations disappear, well, where are the connections? How's there any, Buddha realms, and how's there any Buddhas? How's there anything going on? The Dhammas of Nirvana. How is there anything going on? This is such an important question. What are we going to do about that? Like you could think, it seems to be as the Buddha was more or less saying, well, you don't need to look at that, just look at your immediate experience and you'll realize reality and then it'll sort itself out. But we're a long way away from the time when people got enlightened in the presence of the Buddha. We need more help to shore our faith up, really, to keep us going. So we need to talk about these things, about what would that world be? And at the moment of death, where will we be? Like how can we find our way once we've lost our connection with this world? So there's this sense of connection within the Sangha, with our connection with the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, our connection with those people that we've been helped by, teachers. How do we maintain those connections? This is all very relevant and important. And is that all part of the world that we're trying to abandon or to try to leave aside because it's all suffering? It's clearly not, is it? It's clearly something quite different. So we do need to keep looking at these acknowledging to ourselves there are these two versions of reality. There's our version, which is suffering, and there's the version of reality when we've actually seen through the suffering. And we can use the sources of inspiration that have been given to us by the stories of the great teachers and the kind of rituals and kind of practices that we do that are trying to link directly to that, if you like, world of auspiciousness, as opposed to the world of dukkha. So there's a lot to explore there, and to also look and see if there's more clues in the Pali sources and early sources, and perhaps maybe there's more clues there than we might think at first. Because certainly the Theravada tradition, who've been the main people to use the Pali sources, they're quite selective over which parts that they really focus on and try to explain. So, we've got this huge corpus of material that we can sort of hunt around in and see if we can find early clues to what we now recognise in our own tradition, that have been developed from those early sources, and that there's this continuity. Because I think that sense of a continuity from the time of the Buddha is a great help in strengthening our faith, isn't it? If we feel, what we're doing now is what the Buddha's disciples were doing at the time of the Buddha, it's the same. It gives us a sense of nothing's been lost. I just have to keep reflecting, meditating, reflecting, studying, to kind of get in line with understanding it. It's not that it's kind of disappeared over the course of the centuries. At least I find that very gives me a big boost when I see that sameness. So there's several questions in each group. The first question here is, can you want cessation of suffering for yourself alone? Definitely. You can want it, can't you? You can think, I just want the end of suffering. It's just a matter of reflecting for a while. Could you really not suffer if others were suffering? Could you really? I think you would realise you would still be suffering. Even if others were suffering, you would still be suffering to a certain extent. And it's basically, what would the difference be? What difference would it make to your practice, to the results of your practice? Yes, if you were... I don't think anybody thinks, oh, I just want the end of suffering for myself alone. I think people just don't have the faith or confidence, they don't have the view that it's possible for little me to actually be able to liberate all beings. It's just they don't have that view. So it's a kind of bit what they might call faint-heartedness. In the Ratnagota Vibhaga, it's the fault of faint-heartedness, not being able to give rise to bodhicitta because you think, how could I do that? I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? As long as we think we're anything other than Buddhas, how can we possibly free all beings or bring all beings to the cessation of suffering? But it's just that we have a false assumption about the nature of our being that we haven't let go of. That we think we're less than totality. If we realised that, then bodhicitta would be naturally present. We would want all beings to be free from suffering. And how do we know that what we intuit to be right is really right and not more of our delusions? A very important question, isn't it? Very important. This is a question you need to have on right in the foreground of your practice all the time. And how does that tie with faith, confidence, and trusting your own judgment? At the same time as being open to the possibility I might be wrong. I might have got the wrong end of the stick. I might be making wrong assumptions. Well, you probably are. So this is what Tashi was saying this morning about alertness. One of those conditions that needs to be there is one of the qualities of awareness that need to be there is alertness. Watching out for that. Am I deluding myself? And I think the clue is in the Paticca Samuppada, actually. If you notice that you're reacting for or against, you're feeling contact, and then, you're going into greed, hate, or delusion, and then you're going into, well, what Dashi was drawing our attention to this morning is the hindrances of the kleshas and the... If that's what's going on for us, then clearly we are deluding ourselves. But that doesn't mean that at the centre of all that, we're not getting real insights into something beyond that. So with the help of our teacher and in dialogue with other Dhamma teachers and teachings, we can get more confident of the feel when we're not deluding ourselves. And the more you recognise that feeling of upliftedness and clarity and aliveness and truth that is associated with a moment of insight, the more aware you become that most of the time you're not there. So as long as you don't delude yourself into thinking, well, I get these moments of glimpses of reality. That's who I am, where I am. That's how I am all the time. So if you see faults with me, you're obviously wrong. It's kind of just an opinion, isn't it? You're just clinging on to an idea. But if you're really connecting to it, you're connected to that sense of aliveness, and it is a heart. It's interesting what Dashi was saying about that tender-heartedness of it. If there's a tender-hearted quality to it, then you're probably not too much deluded. But at the same time, you do need to keep looking, because then even that can become attachment. You can get attached to anything. You get attached to your experience. But yes, it's an ongoing project to keep distinguishing between what is true insight and what is moved in and corrupted it with the hindrances, the grasping and so on. How do we work with confusion? Well, that's it, isn't it? That's the path of shamatha and vipassana. And it goes along in stages, doesn't it? Dashu read us a verse. Oh yes, he read out the verse about the prayer for what I've called the prayer for realization that's in our prayer books, which is the one we recite when we're doing the Ngundra practice of Guru Yoga. It's the one you recite 100,000 times. But if you just stop and you look at that verse, you look at it very carefully, it's got all the stages of the path in it. And there's quite a few questions, I think they came up more today about that verse. How do you see things as Dharmakaya? I think you don't need to worry about that at this stage, because that's the sixth line. So first of all, may I give up the self-grasping mind. Can you read it? May I give up the self-grasping mind. It's praying for the blessing to give up the self-clinging mind, to get the mind, that my mind become content. The non-dharma thoughts.
May I abandon the self-clinging mind. May contentment arise in my being. May all non-dharmic thinking cease. May I realize the chitta, the unborn.
Yeah.
May confusion liberate itself.
Yeah.
May I see the world as Dharmakaya.
Yeah, so that's the final stage of when you've gone through the other stages. So it's good to be inspired by that and to aspire to that. But at this stage, I don't think we particularly need the technical term like Dharmakaya to when we're looking at our experience. I think probably you're looking at base Mahamudra, you're looking at the true nature of chitta. And when at the beginning you're looking at the Buddha, the Tathagatagarbha, the Buddha nature. And then when when you actually stabilize that and it's come to fruition, then it's Dharmakaya. But it's the same. It's the Buddha nature when it's realized fully, it's Dharmakaya. So at this stage, I don't think we need to worry too much about is this Dharmakaya or not. It's more like is this genuinely the true nature of my experience, my mind? Is that really what it is, or am I fooling myself? Is this Vijja or not Vijja? Really, is the important point. And the fourth question. That was about how do we work with confusion, sort of in stages, through the stages of that verse, really. And we have one more question relating to Dashu's point on annihilation. When I'm in formless meditation and experiencing a letting go into space, I experience an edge or boundary where I feel if I let go further, I may die. It's not that clearly expressed. It's more like I reach a point of fear and it doesn't feel safe to continue. How can I work with this edge and trust I can go further? This is a sort of meditation question that you need to talk to instructor sort of one-to-one, really. You can come and ask me one-to-one, because a lot depends on who's asking that and at what exactly is going on in their experience. But certainly this fear, I'm wondering again and again as I come up talking to students, because they usually often express their experience in terms of fear. And I wonder if when it talks about the three Vedana of greed, hate and delusion is the usual translation, or attachment and aversion and neutrality, indifference, is it any different from hope and fear? Like when you like Milarepa's songs, when he goes, the final realization is to go beyond all hope and fear. Is that those three, being free from that, caught up in the passing feelings of wanting, hoping, or aversion and wanting to get away from? I mean, fear is aversion, isn't it? I don't want this, and especially I don't want to not exist. It's fear of annihilation, isn't it? I don't want to not exist. I want to exist, which is again one of the categories that come up again and again in the Pali Sutras. This desire for existence, or it was in the first sermon, wasn't it? Desire for existence, or the desire for non-existence. I want to be annihilated. Which is an interesting one, isn't it? So this fear of annihilation drives us, and then when that causes so much suffering, it turns into the wish for annihilation to avoid the suffering that's caused by the desire for existence. But it is on that edge, isn't it? It's really hitting that edge of there's the contact and the feeling, wanting to exist, thirsting for existence, grasping at existence, and then this taking birth, and then the fear that that's all going to be lost again. You've built up this identity, taken birth as something, and now there's this fear that it's all going to collapse, which of course it is. It's exactly what it's going to do. So you're trying to fight off that fear all the time. I say you, I mean we, as in that cycle of, as long as we're caught in that cycle, that's what the worst thing that could happen is we would die. But we're going to die. There's just no question about it. So it's a really strange place to try and hang on to, isn't it? Because it's completely hopeless, because we are going to die. So it's fear is right there in the heart of it all, isn't it? That's driving that whole cycle of dukkha. And then in the Heart Sutra every day we say, and they don't have fear. The bodhisattvas don't have fear. Because they've got no confusion, they have no fear. So as long as we have confusion, we will have this fear. So how can I work with this edge and trust I can go further? Well, keep going. That's what we're all working with, and we're finding our way through that. But yes, it's the sort of thing you can talk about in a meditation interview, because it really depends on quite what's going on there in your meditation and your experience, and what you might or might not be able to do at the stage you're at. So the next set of questions is Patty's group. I'm going fast. I hope that's all right. Am I gabbling? You wouldn't dare say if I was, would you? Okay, what's the relationship between heart wish and right view? I think Dashtu had a good go at trying to address that this morning, so I think I'll leave that. We'll come round to it again, in our spiral. How not to contrive our experience of the unborn? Yes, that wouldn't make sense, would it? How can one rest in the unborn? Well, you first have to see it, don't you? So, since we can merely glimpse it, that's right. We get these little nyams. Some people get a very strong nyam that lasts for, weeks or something, or hours or a few minutes, but I certainly get very short glimpses, but increasingly convincing and stable as time goes on. That's the good news. But it's a glimpse. I mean, most of the time, I'm just off. I kind of know. I don't forget it somehow that it's quite close, but it's just not quite. Yeah, still noticing that I'm still making things up. So all you can do is not try to grasp it, and just to keep looking as clearly as you can, and trusting that it's there. And you're all the time noticing what that you're making things up. It wasn't necessary to make that up. You're making it too complicated. Just noticing, and each time you notice, it's like that vijja breaking through the world of suffering, that mandala of suffering. Each time you wake up, it collapses, and then it reestablishes itself. But you're gaining more and more confidence that actually your true home is where it all collapses. So I like this term, a change of allegiance, but one of the questions was about alignment. I think alignment and allegiance perhaps are strongly, maybe they're the same thing, maybe different names for the same thing. And really, you find you've got that faculty within you. You've got that faculty of choice. You can choose, I could go that way or that way. I'm choosing that way. I'm sort of choosing that way, but sort of veering off again, but I really want to go that way. So we have that. It's inherent in our Buddha nature to have that choice. Otherwise, there'd be no such thing as freedom, would there? So when we have total freedom of choice, that's when we're liberated. At the moment we've got a certain amount of choice, it comes up, or I can choose that. I'm not quite at the point where I'm convinced that I'm going to keep to that. But then if we keep to something and we keep our word and we learn to trust ourselves, we get more and more confidence that when I say I'll do that, I will do that. When I choose that, I will go that way. That's one of the basic qualities of Shila. We talk about first quality of generosity, giving up, letting go, not holding on to things. That's absolutely essential, like renunciation, generosity. And then the next one is being able to follow through. Shila. It's often translated as discipline or morality or ethics. But the essential point of Shila is that you do what you say you'll do along the lines of what is skillful. Obviously, it's no great virtue to be able to do what you say you're going to do, and it's negative. But if you've got that power to do what you say you're going to do and follow through, then you can practice Dharma, because you can keep choosing the right path, keep choosing the right path, keep choosing the right path, and eventually, all that kind of slipping off into the mandala of delusion falls away. So one can't emphasize that enough. In fact, traditionally you wouldn't be taught this prajna that we're teaching this year unless you'd had a thorough training in Shila to start off with. You can't hope to be able to meditate or to gain stability or shamatha if there's no Shila. And you can't hope to develop vipassana or insight if you've got no shamatha. So it would be a waste of time to do what we're doing. But we're doing spiral learning. So we're getting a little bit more understanding of prajna is going to help us be motivated to practice a Shila, and then they'll feed into each other. So that's my chosen teaching method. Plus the fact that everybody's got at a different stage in the cycle, aren't they? Some people have already developed a lot of shamatha in previous practice, and in various ways, and Shila as well. I think in general, the kind of people that find me are already quite strong Shila, in the sense that they're law-abiding citizens who've, been able to follow through and keep their lives together in a we don't use the word virtuous way, do we? But say in a loving and compassionate, caring, honest way. So I seem to always, the people who come to me seem to always be, that seems to be where they're coming from. Obviously, if I was teaching in another situation where it was a lot of crime and violence, and I would start with Shila very, very strongly. That would be the main thing I would be teaching. So in terms of experiencing the unborn, the non-arising, it's just going to be a gradual process. You just gradually gain more and more confidence in it, because you can't grasp it. So the mind that wants to grasp it and wants to make it or make something out of it or conceptualize it is never going to succeed. So it's just a matter of gaining conviction about that and looking at those other faculties that we have, which are not conceptualizing and grasping, but are tending towards letting go, following through the different qualities of shamatha and vipassana. So we develop those qualities, and not to hope that I should be able to sit down and rest in the unborn. I mean, and rest is not a very good word either, because rest implies dwelling over a period of time, whereas actually it's almost like you stay there, you stay on that point to the best of your ability, even if it's just to touch it. It doesn't mean you touch it and then stay there. How can I stay there? That wouldn't work. I think that's maybe what the question's getting at. So moving on quickly, we could spend a long time on all of these, couldn't we? Is there anything positive about dependent origination, or is it all bad? Well, I mean, the term dependent origination, of course, in itself is paticca samuppada. It's the way things are, like one thing implies another thing is present. So it's the whole of a peaceness of that. And we're talking about it in the particular context of the 12 links from avidya and the suffering. So it's all the 12 links of suffering, what hold it together. And so, yeah, suffering, I think, generally speaking, that's our definition of bad, isn't it? If it's suffering, it's bad. Then people might say, oh yes, but you can suffer and it actually is good, it leads to good, and you don't need to think it's bad. So now we're getting more sophisticated, and the meaning of suffering is sort of shifting around a bit. If you're not suffering from suffering, then it's not suffering. Perhaps you need another word, but I don't know quite where you bring it in, at what point. But I think language is flexible enough for us to make up a sentence like that that's kind of self-contradictory, but intuitively we can get a sense of what it means. So when it says, can it be used for a good purpose, presumably the question is, could suffering be used for a good purpose? And of course it is, because suffering is then the basis for faith, isn't it? When you realize suffering deeply enough, you realize the whole process of how it happens deeply enough, then you can develop true renunciation. Then you can start moving away from it. So it's wonderful, actually. You need it. You need suffering to be able to realize what its nature is and how it comes about, and also how it's brought to an end. So from that point of view, you could say, and that's what we tend to get, that kind of remark in the Mahayana and in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions about, and the songs we sing, and the songs that Rinpoche gets us singing, suffering is basically good, or suffering is something that you can take on yourself and take away from others, and you can use it for developing love and compassion and so on. Which is, in a way, doesn't fit in with the 12 links which are leading to suffering. I mean, it's not part of that. It's actually talking about the path out of suffering, isn't it? So not the path, the cycle you lock into when you're talking about the paticca samuppada. Once there's avidya, there will be suffering. So it's an interesting question in the light of that teaching. What's going on in the Mahayana and Mahamudra when it's trying to say the opposite almost? That, suffering, you don't have aversion to suffering, you turn towards it and all that kind of teaching. You really need to look at that when you've understood these first teachings, to see them in context. But it's spiral learning. You can learn the other way around. You can learn that first and then come back to this, or you learn this first and then go on to. the way it's talked about in the Mahayana and the Mahamudra Dzogchen traditions. But there's a lot to discuss there. That's a really important area. But of course, once you have Vijja, once there's any Vijja, then there's no more those 12 links. They collapse. So if they're still there, then there's a Vijja there. So your practice, although it might be quite skillful and you're making good use of it, there's still a Vijja there, so it still would be suffering from this point of view. With each of these questions, I really need a comeback from each person to kind of continue the conversation, so I'm sacrificing that for trying to get through as many as I can. How does dependent origination relate to what is conditioned? And then all things are assembled. This was sort of quote marks. All things are assembled. That's probably a translation for all things are constructed in this world. Does dependent origination explain how they came to be this way? Not so much how they came to be, but how they come to be when you look at your experience and you see how does dependent origination relate to what is. Yeah, that raises a number of questions about what one means by things and conditioned things and so on. What did I think? So when you're talking about the 12 links, Paticca Samuppada, you're talking about suffering. It's not kind of, what exists and what doesn't exist. It's talking about suffering and how it comes about. So, and in your immediate experience. So this question about things, all conditioned things, all compounded things are impermanent. I think this must be what it's referring to. That comes up very much when we're trying to discover, well, you could say, who am I? What I'm attached to is impermanent and conditioned and not fit to be called self. This is what Dashi was saying this morning, wasn't it? So these things can't be the unborn. They can't be the true self. They can't be the Buddha nature because they're impermanent and changing. And you notice here, and Dashi was doing this morning, he was just using self as one would normally use self and how the Buddha used the word self. When you look for yourself, you realize your body isn't yourself, your feelings aren't yourself, your thoughts are not yourself, stream of consciousness is not yourself, because it's all changing. It's impermanent. So he's using self as being that which will become liberated, really. It's like the Buddha nature, and in fact, in the Tathagata Sutras, it's called Buddha nature is called Supreme Self. So I don't think we need to be shy about using self in a normal way when we talk about that's not what I truly am. That's not true. That's not me. That's not what I truly am. But a lot of the time we're attached to what isn't really us, aren't we? So that's where this, don't be attached to what's compounded and conditioned, and because it's not you. Don't be attached to it. And that's what, when we don't realize that, that's when the Paticca Samuppada of the 12 links happens, because we don't realize that our true nature. So then we grasp on to what is impermanent and changing, and that leads to grasping and birth and suffering and all the rest of it. So there's a contrast there between what isn't conditioned and compounded, our true nature, Buddha nature, or nirvana, or the unborn, or whatever you call it, and then what isn't that, which we need to relinquish. We need to give up. We need to stop clinging to it. So, how does that happen? Well, if we look at our experience, we can see it happening, can't we? And it's really strange. You do wonder, how does that happen? How does that happen? And this is what in the Queen Shamala Devi Sutra, she's saying to the Buddha, well, how can it be that this primordially pure mind could become, how can it be primordially pure and unstained and yet it becomes stained? There's two big questions. And the Buddha said, yeah, they're two big questions. And, the more I think about it, I think, and they're going to be answered at the same time, aren't they? When I really see the nature of the unborn, the true nature of mind, that's when I will see how it is that I cannot see it. It's like the two sides of the realization, really, aren't they? Seeing the suffering and the cessation of suffering, you see it at the same time. So when it's obscured, that's suffering. And when it's unobscured, that's not suffering. Those are the two things that we have to realize, that suffering and the origin of suffering on the one side, and then cessation of suffering, and how that happens, and therefore how it can unhappen. Yeah, the path of the unhappening of suffering. So these are very profound things we're talking about. We're going to be spiral learning around these teachings until we've cracked them. So then Samton's group says, hearing about the Four Noble Truths for the first time was what set me on the Buddhist path. There was a sense of relief at hearing about it and the truth of suffering. Would you expound on what that sense of relief was? I was really thought about this question, and I think, yeah, hearing about suffering is like, oh, they're not trying to pull the wool over my eyes anymore, This is, if we're going to look at suffering, and that there is some hope, there's something very honest about that, something very true to our experience about that, something congruent about that in our experience, isn't there, that we encounter suffering. And there's also this sense that there's a path forward. There is a path, there is a way out of that. There's some hope of resolution and an ending of suffering. So just to hear that, and hear that addressed, and hear that openly and honestly addressed, I could imagine that in itself would produce a sense of relief. I don't know who was asking that, whether they had any other ideas about that. Interesting though, isn't it? Just hearing about it could already be, you're sort of wandering around, people are telling you all sorts of nonsense, and then suddenly, that's true to my experience. Yeah, interesting. And Kunzan's group came up with a number of questions in relation to avidya and how we seem to exist in time, wondering what happened before this life and what will happen afterwards. There you are, speculating. It appears as if birth and death and all the other links in the chain of dependent origination are plotted against a linear trajectory. And how do we open to the non-arisen and non-ceasing, which is outside of time? What will be left when we do? So these are the questions I've been hinting at, haven't I? But it's, I think it's a mistake to see the teaching of the 12 links as being linear. I think this is what Dashu's been saying. I don't think it's linear. I think that's why it's quite difficult to know how to translate it sometimes. It's not exactly that one thing causes the other, but the whole structure of this mandala of suffering all those elements sort of feed into each other all the time. It's sort of like a mandala feeding on itself. And of course, one of the elements in that is the samskaras of grasping at ideas like time and space. Like I'm separate, I exist in time, I exist in space, and clinging to those, just that framework. I mean, this is why I'm wondering what samskara actually covers in the end. Is it the whole framework that when there's a vijja, you don't see what's the true nature of things, but you have this kind of structured framework of a time, place, self, other, separateness, all sorts of underlying assumptions that are quite difficult to pick up on, and almost they're not impermanent, because they're almost like somehow the mandala is structured on these assumptions. So once there's a vijja, then this comes into play. All these false assumptions that have... But then it's really interesting, because you can't help but want to try and understand the nature of everything all at once, isn't there? At that point, you want to think, well, what are scientists going to find out about the nature of time and space and consciousness and all these things? They'll probably find lots more assumptions. So how do we open to the non-arisen and non-ceasing? Well, which is outside of time, it is actually through vijja. So we need that pointing out, we need to connect to that, we need to have faith in that. Connect to the vijja as best we can, and then these assumptions start to kind of show up. And, we can see they're causing suffering. That's creating the mandala of suffering, and therefore you develop a disenchantment, you develop a revulsion, actually. And I think there's a lot of talk in Mahamudra about, you see suffering, you see everything as positive, you see, you transform all emotions, don't need to give out sense pleasures, blah, 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 as if somehow you can just carry on as you are. But those teachings only apply if you've already seen what needs to be abandoned. And this is what Dash is talking about when these pointing out in these Pali Sutras, is strong emphasis the Buddha put on you have to develop a strong revulsion for dukkha and the world of dukkha, the world of dukkha. You have to see it, and you have to realize this is not the way I'm going. You really have to choose out very, very strongly. And when you have chosen out very strongly and you started to kind of work with that, you get to the point where you can actually see everything is Dhammakaya or whatever, but it is based on a very strong revulsion. And in the Dorji Chang Chungma, which we recite, some of us recite, that's it, the real foot or basis or ground of meditation is revulsion. And the word in Tibetan is actually to, vomit. And Riksin Shikpo sometimes describes it in terms of actually vomiting up that false view, because it's just poisoning you. It's something you just have to get out of your system. So it's quite strong language. And you think, well, how does that tie in with our, DHB approach of seeing openness, clarity, sensitivity in all our experience, and that's somehow the basis, that is our Buddha nature, and we need to have confidence in that. It fits exactly, but it's missing out an emphasis on the need for revulsion, because I'm teaching people who often don't have any faith in anything. Our culture as a whole doesn't have much faith in anything. So first of all, I think we need some sense of what we can have faith in that's within our own experience, so that there's a sense that there is a path. And then when that's well established enough, we can start looking at these kind of teachings and realize just how important that is. That's what Dashi was saying this morning, that heart wish, just how important that is, that we have that nature we're coming from there, and it's from there that we will recognize this is dukkha, this is what I have to really abandon. This I have to have zero tolerance for the world. And then you can start talking about recognizing that the nature of your experience in this very positive light. Even what's normally thought of as suffering can be looked at in a very positive light, but on the basis of having that strong revulsion for the mandala of suffering. This is what we're talking about this weekend. So, is existence an illusion? It's really interesting. What we grasp at, anything that we grasp at, we conceptualize and grasp at and have views about, is illusion. But is reality illusion-like? Because that's also used for describing Khenpo Rinpoche is often saying that the way things appear is illusion-like. But he doesn't always mean that it has to be, it's the mandala of it's the world of dukkha and therefore has to be abandoned. He often means the wonder of the way manifestation happens at all when you don't have avidya. It's like magic, just appears, and like it's something quite wonderful, and you see it in his face. He goes, "Oh, it's not there, but it's appearing." So he's not talking about you're seeing that through avidya. You're saying you're seeing that with vidya. So it has that same quality of, kind of, it's so clear and bright, and yet you can't grasp it. So it's used in both those ways, which is sometimes a bit confusing because there's two different levels of teaching. But is everything an illusion in the sense that there's nothing there to discover? If everything's illusion, then there's nothing to discover except that it's all an illusion. Well, that's not true. What's truly existence is amazing. There is something there to be realized, and that's I don't know if that was what the question was. So are beings real? Is our love real? Are Buddhas real? It's the joy of meeting and communicating and loving, and is that real? Yeah, that's real. Is it graspable? No. Everything worth having is not graspable. It's true, isn't it? Can't grasp it, can't pin it down, can't define it. So that's my answer. That's what I say. I think I could probably back it up with scriptural sources. Really quite interesting to work out how I would best demonstrate that. But it's there in all the stories, isn't it? The whole story of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Mahayana Sutras. It's all full of what's real. Now, that's a big topic there. So, third question, could I say more about how the undeniable fact of existence of suffering shows that the extreme position of non-existence is disproved, and how this relates to the middle way? Is suffering itself an illusion? Very interesting, isn't it? It's a similar question. What is illusion? What does it mean? Which is very interesting as well. So I don't think you could say, the Buddha said you wouldn't say suffering didn't exist, but he didn't say you would say suffering existed. He was very careful about that. It's quite impressive just how careful he was to not say anything existed. But also he didn't say it didn't exist either. So to say suffering exists, I think you'd say really it's an undeniable fact that we suffer. That's undeniable, isn't it? Whether it exists or not, well, yes, suffering is real, isn't it? In a sense, it has to be real. shows that the extreme position of non-existence is disproved. I think I'm going to leave this question because I think we need to go back and look at the Kachayana Sutta again and rephrase this question a bit. Did you want to have a go at it right now, Dashu? I think it needs rephrasing a bit to make it clearer. Hello?
Yeah, hello. I don't know that I would. Other than the Kachayana Sutta, it's not, as it says here, the question says the position of non-existence is disproved. And he's not proving or disproving anything.
That's right.
He's just saying I guess what he's saying is, when you see suffering or you see the origin of suffering, you wouldn't say that it didn't exist, because that's what it is that you're looking at, that's what you're talking about. So it makes no sense to say it doesn't exist. And then when you see the cessation, you wouldn't say that it exists. It's not disproving either, it's just the direct seeing of the experience. And then I suppose it ends up being that which we call existence is that has origin and it's suffering. So that's what we call existence. And if that's not there, you don't need to call it anything, existent or non-existent. So I'm not sure he's disproving an extreme position so much as not either.
But it's worth keep coming back to that question, and whether suffering is an illusion. Again, it's the term suffering is sort of sliding around there, isn't it? Because if it's suffering, while you're suffering, it's real. And then when you see through see through the 12 links and you see it for what it is, well, it was like an illusion, actually. But you wouldn't say that to somebody who was actually caught up in it. Or you would, if Khenpo Rinpoche would frequently do it, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Because, it depends whether the person can actually see it from a completely different point of view or not. Okay. Have you looked at all these questions, Dashud? Had you thought about any of them that you wanted to answer?
No, I'm quite happy to carry on listening, but I just thought I'd bring in one of the sources that I put in my research notes. It says about existence is an illusion, it's like a flame, and it reminded me of Khenpo Rinpoche. It said it's an illusion, it's like a flame. The samskaras cease in an instant. Not being real, they come and go.
All right. Nice. These are points to come back to in and reflect on and using in our meditation again and again. They're really highlighting points of within our experience that we need to really look at again and again. So it's not like a theory that you're trying to kind of construct. It's like of some helping you to look at your experience more precisely. So please look at it with that kind of attitude, because I think that's how these teachings are helpful. Okay, Tara's group. What would happen if we all gained right view? Yeah, would we all disappear? And would the world disappear? In other words, what does remain manifesting when there is only the unconditioned? Well, there are stories. I know Kalu Rinpoche used to tell us stories of yogins who would disappear. Well, there's plenty of stories about that in the scriptures, actually, that they disappear, and sometimes the whole country disappears. So it's possible that might happen. That'd be good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Reason Shikpa talks about that too, that actually, in theory, there's no reason why we shouldn't just all disappear. But then, does that mean, I mean, if this world, this world of suffering, of dukkha, disappears, well then all you've got left is Buddhas. So they're probably having a grand old time. Yeah, maybe popping in and out of manifestation, creating mandalas and helping beings, enjoying Pure Lands. Who knows what they'll be doing? Yeah, but would we be able to see them? Probably not. So how did the whole mass of suffering begin? I mean, that's why the whole earth, the whole universe shakes when Kondanya sees. He sees, and the whole world was like, woo! And when the Buddha became enlightened, it shook. The whole fabric of the consensual reality sort of is shaken by it. So who knows what might happen? I mean, if all of us gained it at the same moment, I mean, would that be in all world systems or just our world system? Getting technical now. So how did the whole mass of suffering begin? Did it have a beginning? You really need to look. You just have to look. So that whole mass of suffering, avidya, did avidya begin? Like, beginnings and endings are something that you kind of, once there's avidya, you start to construct that kind of a understanding, don't you? But if there's no avidya, what would it mean? Everything changes, doesn't it? So, yeah. The question of beginning is a time question, isn't it? You're thinking in a linear way of time beginning and carrying on and then ending. So you've already put a construction there. You've already not seen the true nature that's beyond time and space. You're not seeing that. So that means avidya's there. And if avidya's there, then however far back you go, you never come to a beginning because it's already a concept. But it's good to look, to really look how your mind works. Look how, when you think, the thought begins. Is that the beginning? Is that the beginning? What do I mean by beginning? It's a concept, isn't it? It's a kind of, I'm still in the realm of Paticca Samuppada, still the realm of avidya. So you do need to have that faith and confidence that you can just stay not knowing because there's avidya. But you're becoming very clear, when there's avidya, this is what happens. That question arises and you feel stuck. So as avidya is present, that's what it is. You're starting to see dukkha. Starting to really penetrate what is dukkha. So yeah, keep asking these questions. So how does dependent origination relate to karma, cause and effect? Are we talking about the same thing? No. Where does karma happen in the 12 links? I think it's a different conversation. I've sort of talked about this a bit already, haven't I? Yeah. Before the Buddha teaches the Paticca Samuppada 12 links, he's already made sure that the person he's speaking to understands karma and right action and shila, and so he's talking to somebody who he can trust to not go off at a tangent, as it were. And then he's saying, okay, so we're caught up in this cycle of rebirth, how do we break it? By seeing what's causing it. And it's these 12 links together. So when we see with Vijja, those links collapse, and then we can break through the whole thing. But then, as Dashi was talking this morning, he was also saying the Buddha doesn't leave us just with that, because he said, well, how do we get to that point where we can do that? And then you go from the suffering. Once you've really seen the suffering, then you can start to develop a kind of, you can recognize, I need to go in the opposite direction. I need to aim for the ending of suffering, which is the Vijja. And how do I do that? And then there's the steps that go up towards true knowledge that we were looking at this morning, like how do you go through the shamatha, vipassana, and the different stages, and then true knowledge arises, which is the Vijja. And when that true knowledge arises, then the dukkha cycle collapses. It's very congruent, isn't it? I mean, it sort of starts to kind of feed into itself, the structure of these teachings. But you do have to spend time thinking about them. So the way out of the whole cycle of suffering is through faith. What does faith mean in this context, and how does meditation relate to finding this first step in the way out of samsara? So this was yesterday, and today Dashi talked about it and gave us a lot to think about, so I won't go into that anymore right now. Gendon's group, how does the Noble Eightfold Path relate to the DHB course? I think, again, Dashi was talking about that, wasn't he? That actually the DHB course is talking about the heart wish and right view, basically. But the Arya Eightfold Path, the Noble Eightfold Path, is right view it is the Vijja itself, when you've actually got to the point where you can see that through that Paticca Samuppada, you can see, you've got Vijja, you see how it is, and then you can just rely on that. That's make the right resolve, that's, taking the heart wish into the pranidhana, then the right speech, the right livelihood, the right mindfulness, the right shamatha. I've missed some out somewhere, but it's kind of everything follows on so that you go into the samadhi of reality itself, as opposed to a samadhi mandala that's deluded. You go into a samadhi mandala that is actually complete one with reality. So it's interesting it ends on samadhi, the Eightfold Path, because we tend to think, well, we end up with enlightenment, which would be right knowledge, but actually the Eightfold Path begins with right knowledge. It's the Arya Eightfold Path, and that's why I was saying this one. That's why Tibetans tend not to talk about it very much. They only bring it in when they're talking about the factors of enlightenment. When they're describing the stupa and the different factors of enlightenment, and at the stage of seeing, then you start the Eightfold Path. But there's a version of the Eightfold Path that has become a common teaching throughout the Buddhist world, I think, which is just, you get it in children's school books. The Eightfold Path is right view, which is, knowing what's good and what's bad, and following what's good and giving up what's bad, and then you live your life in a good way, following the Eightfold Path, as if anyone could understand it at a mundane level. And it works quite well, and because Westerners are reading Buddhism from all different sources, they keep asking lamas about the Eightfold Path. And then I've seen them thinking, why do you want to talk about the Eightfold Path? Well, all right, I'll talk about the Eightfold Path. What is it? Okay. And then they make up teachings that are kind of good, sort of 8 good things to say for people at our level. But the reason they don't use that structure is actually correct, because it should be within the context of when you have you've actually seen the Arya truth. That's when the Eightfold, when you've seen the true nature of suffering and you're actually the origin of suffering, and then that's the right view to follow the Eightfold Path, which is based already on Vidya. So that's why there's that kind of, Tibetans tend to not use that structure. What they would use instead would be, they'd probably follow some other formula or other structure for teaching on that level, on that ordinary level. They'd, like teaching, or they'd probably use the 6 paramitars would be their favourite one. There's quite a lot of ways you could go about teaching the basic Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. You can use different Buddhist teachings for hanging your points upon, as it were. But it's interesting, isn't it? So how does it relate to openness, clarity, sensitivity? Because openness, clarity, sensitivity are Vidya. They're the true nature. When you see the true nature as it is, it's openness, clarity, sensitivity, and everything. Is the same as the unborn, which is the same as the Tathagata Garbha, which is the same as the Dharmatara, talked about in different contexts. Why are the Pali sources not taught in Tibetan Buddhism? Well, they didn't. I don't know if they translated them even, actually. Does anyone know?
I don't think they received the whole.
I don't think they translated them. Yeah. So it's historical reasons, really. But all the key elements that are there in the Pali are in the the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and in the right place, like I was just saying. It's there. But then the way they've got their two ways of teaching. They tend to teach this from, they don't usually even study the Mahayana sutras, let alone the Pali sutras. They're very much, when they talk about study in Shedras, they're studying mainly commentaries, or I could say entirely studying commentaries. And then you've got the Upadesha tradition, the yogic tradition of pointing out instructions, and the kind of meditation texts on shamatha and vipassana. Some of that's studied in the Shedra, but that would be more the kind of thing you studied on the meditators would study. And you can find all the same equivalencies. This is what Dashu's doing by looking at moonbeams, and Tashi Namjal's works and Ninth Karmapa's work. You can see the parallels teaching meditation with the way the Buddha was teaching, because he was basically teaching how to practice. He wasn't really teaching a philosophy. So very much not. I mean, he really consistently would not teach in that philosophical sense of, intellectual views. He was completely intolerant of it. You think of Socrates like that, don't you? But I mean, the Buddha was like that. I don't know. Maybe you don't think of Socrates like that, but maybe that's a false comparison. Okay, requesting some clarification from Dashu. Over to you, Tashu.
Well, the question says, when talking about Sabha, the all, you seem to have said there is nothing which is beyond Sabha to experience. Actually, the sutta says, this is all there is, and if anybody was to try and describe another all, they wouldn't be able to, because it would be the translation's a bit odd. It said, it would be outside of his domain. But I think what it's getting at is, this is you can't talk about it because anything outside of this is inexpressible. It's beyond the realm of conceptual processes. So the all is everything that we sort of objectify and conceptualize. And what's outside of that, it's not that it can't be experienced, but you can't describe it and you can't talk about it. That's my guess on that. But the sutra says, if somebody tried to say, dismiss this all and make clear another all, when you question him about it, he wouldn't be able to answer because it would be outside of his domain. We can discuss maybe in a study group what that might actually be.
And then, have you answered the whole question?
Well, in the Mandala Principle book, we have no experience of what my Lydion sense is, so that we can only point to the experience itself. Are these both saying the same thing? And I would say, yes, I think they are. And then could we make some technical stuff about Vedana, Vijnana, Phassa, and Nama Rupa? And again, I think that's probably best left for the discussion group, because each one of these phrases there's so much in them, and it's not clear, and it doesn't, I think most of them are pre-Buddhist terminology, and so it's really interesting to look and see how the commentaries have talked about it and how it's mentioned in the texts themselves, and I'm not sure it makes it much clearer. We'll pull it apart and go, so this is the definition of that, so much as this is the definition of our experience. Our sort of divided subject-object experience.
Yep, I think we can have some interesting discussions arising out of this. So Ursul's group, all of us felt that the talks, that was yesterday, from beginning to end, had a really significant effect on our thinking about suffering, even if we cannot necessarily put it into words clearly yet, and helped us feel there were openings for each personally to find our way into understanding dependent origination and how it relates to our awakened heart sangha experience. So that all sounds positive. We thought the talks brought fresh sense of what faith is and how it works, and we got even more of that today. And then the question was, neither Lama nor Desha mentioned the word concepts today. Sometimes we can feel there is a sort of inevitability about being trapped in our concepts as we look at the world, seeing birth and death as chicken and egg, or two sides of a oneness, really seems to point somewhere quite different. Right view is not just a bigger, better concept, is it? No, that's right. How can we practice to develop better understanding of this? Well, yes, that's our task, isn't it, to find out that. But I thought it was an important question because the Tibetans, as I said, they tend to not use the formula of the Eightfold Path when they're teaching meditation. But what they do is they tell you to look at your mind, the nature of mind, and notice thoughts arising, staying, passing away. Look very carefully, look very directly. And then you start to notice that the thoughts are called namtok. So you're looking at these namtok, these creations. And namtok is quite an ordinary word in Tibetan, actually, for a notion. So you look at, and it's also used for what's going on in your mind. Just in the space of your mind, there's these things appearing, which are called namtok as well. And then when you think, oh, that's how it is, that's a namtok as well. That's got a different feel to it because you've pinned it down. So when it's loosely floating around, not particularly identified, it's called namtok. And then when you fixate on it and think that's what that is. That's also called Namtok. And then I think that second one is in a way what you're talking about in the Paticca that you've actually taken those things to be objects. That's the divided awareness of consciousness, of vijnana, taking subject and object, fixating on something, taking birth as, you're born in that mandala of that particular namtok, that particular notion, you take that to be real. So it's like the whole of the 12 links are captured by this one word, namtok. And they use it all the time. It's one of those words that has a lot of life in it. You hear it so often that it's kind of got it's a very alive word. It doesn't sound technical at all. It sounds like, my namtok. Oh, that's just my namtok. Oh, that's just your namtok. It's your notion, your idea, or you're stuck in your namtok, or oh, she's got lots of namtok. Don't take any notice of her. So it's used in all sorts of ways, but I think if you look at all the different ways that it's used, you can see actually namtok is paticca samuppada. That is how we trap ourselves, because we take these things to be too real. Once we've decided that's how it is, like you say, that's your samskaras. Then the rest follows. Once you don't see it as it is, you see your namtok. And once you've got your namtok, you then enter into this world that's created by your namtok. And then you get, some things you like, some things you don't like. The namtok about yourself. I exist, that's your namtok. I'm important, that's your namtok. All your kleshas are namtok. So you've got one general word with the right connotation to cover that whole field, which the only way to deal with it is to look directly in your practice, in your meditation, notice it. The mindfulness that Dashi was talking about this morning. You have to be aware of it, you have to be alert, you have to notice when it's namtok, and you have to be able to let go of namtok. So it is a paticca samuppada process, but they're not breaking it down. They're leaving you to see for yourself how it all follows one after the other. This is the conclusion I've come to, because I notice it works quite well. If you speak Tibetan and you use namtok, it works quite well. It's got the right sort of experiential lightness and heaviness at the same time. It's heavy because namtok caused all your problems, and it's light because it's something that you're doing all the time and we all know about, and it's in our direct experience, and it's something we can deal with. Even if we don't, we could. So it's got... So I haven't been talking in terms of concepts, because actually it's not there in the 12 links. It doesn't actually have vikalpa, which is interesting, isn't it? It's not written, it's not included as... So you could say, well, the whole process is vikalpa. Actually, the whole process. Once you've got the skandhas, and you've got the formations, you've got the samskaras, you've got vikalpa. It covers the whole thing, really. So what you're aiming for is nirvikalpa, sort of freedom from kalpa, free from vikalpa, free from namtok. And that's what Tibetans are always talking about in the Mahamudra texts. But of course it doesn't translate very well, because in English, concepts doesn't have that same connotation. Concept sounds intellectual. It's not a particularly emotional term. It doesn't sound like something that, links to kleshas and problems and, our funny ways of being. It doesn't have any of that connotation. So it's interesting that we didn't use it at all, actually, when we were talking about paticca samuppada. We didn't use the English word concepts, or even the Sanskrit word vikalpa. And these are the things that are going to be very interesting to look at, because they're going to give us good clues into how we need to talk about these things in English. What do English words do? And what English words are good in what contexts? Because we've got quite good words of our own that we could use in different contexts. But it will always leave out something that will need to be brought in by some other some other way of talking. But I find this kind of work very interesting because it's surprisingly how powerful words are actually in helping our insight or hindering it. Assumptions around words. It's like Riggs and Sheep is always saying, each word is a mandala. And it's really true. There's an emotional edge to how every word is used. And if you start to use that word outside of where those guardians are holding a meaning together, you actually can feel very irritated and upset about how someone's using a word, can't you? Sort of like, no, that's not how you use that word. That's not the right word. And it's, yeah, you could have a whole conversation about that, actually, the emotionality around words, because, words become abuse and become very hurtful and harmful, don't they? They're kind of mandalas. So yes, we're trapped in concepts in the same way that we're trapped by, avidya and the samskaras and the vijnana, name and form and contact and blah, 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 grasping and so on. So yes, it's another way of talking about the same thing. I don't know if that helps, but we can have to continue the discussion at some other time.
Lama, can I just let you know that it's 5:45 and we have thanks to offer and we have evening practice starting in 15 minutes.
What time was I supposed to finish? 1:30. Oh gosh. I thought. Oh, sorry. Gosh. Oh, there you are. I did my best.
Thank you.
Lots more to go. We can look at some of these questions in our discussion group, can't we? But thank you very much for the questions. For me, an important part of a weekend like this, because otherwise I don't know what's happening. But when I read the questions, I can get a real sense of a conversation. So thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Dashi, did you say you wanted to say something next?
Oh, okay. Only very briefly to thank the events team for pulling this together, because Lama and I Lama was in retreat in January, and I was busy, and we didn't really get round to talking about what this weekend might be until quite late. So then we had to say to the events team, okay, it's going to be on this, and this is how it's going to be, and this is how we're going to set up. So they sort of did everything at the last minute and managed to put it all together, and I think it's been really good to have. And then, of course, we step forward to hold the discussion groups and spaces. It's a real kind of celebration of our connections as a Sangha. I really appreciate it. So thank you. And thank you to Lama for encouraging me to teach on this, because it's a really good subject.
And thank you, Dashu. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, thank you, Dashu, for picking up the ball and running with it. I'm really enjoying chasing after you.
Cindy, did you have some words of thanks for Lama? You need to unmute yourself if that's okay.
Was that me?
Yeah, it's you.
Okay. This is for Lama. We are so very fortunate to be able to receive the teachings from you and Dashu this weekend and always. To me, it's miraculous that we can gather together from our homes and be right here in the shrine room, able to listen and ponder, discuss and practice together. I trust that none of us I might cry. I trust that none of us take these opportunities for granted, and want you to know how very much we appreciate the clear, tender care you bring and teach us to bring in uncovering the sincerity and authenticity of our own experience in relationship to the teachings, our practice and life. Equal love for all beings, true happiness for self and others, and a true verifiable path. I don't know exactly what others feel and experience, but as we settle in and listen to you and Dashu begin to unwind these teachings, and then listen to one another wonder, some magic happens, and it feels quite really like a quiet stream of nourishment burbling from heart to heart, with love, warmth, blessings, and gratitude on behalf of this beautiful Sangha.
Ah, thank you. Lovely.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I enjoy reading these. Thank you very much. Very touching.
So Jeremy, you had a few words now for Dashu.
Yes, I do. I wanted to thank you, Dashu, immensely for your time and your teaching this weekend. It's been quite amazing. And I think I speak for everyone with all I'm going to say to you from others that I've been discussing with in groups or outside. All in all, I feel like you really invite us on the path with you. And in my own experience, that's what I felt firstly when I joined the Sangha, and you really welcomed me in it, and made me feel like I was in good hands, I think. Again, like I've had this from others as well, but it seems like Dashu, you can really take out the gibberish that we say about our experience and just put them into words and sentences that I guess make sense back to us. And that's something very profound that I found with you and Lama. It's quite amazing, to be honest, to make sense of us for us. And all of this gave me and us, I think, real sense of family, I think, and a sense of a really beautiful mandala, I think. Again, I think I speak for everyone, and I think that you really bring the profundity of the teachings with all your research and investigations, with as well all the playfulness of it all. And that's something that I really enjoy in your teachings. Is it's so profound, but at the same time it's so joyful and playful, and it's really beautiful, I think. And I think we're all amazed at how you blend the depth and the lightness of the teachings to life. And in my own experience, alongside Lama's softness and kindness and profundity, it really brought me a lot of confidence in the path. And I guess really helping us start untangling that dreadlock, like we were talking about, all those aspects of the path that, again, with others that I've been discussing with in groups, we didn't really see connections between those different aspects, or didn't really understand the full extent of those. Lastly, it's quite funny because this morning we were talking about this in my group, and I don't really remember how it came about, but we were talking about how when you're asked to speak in public or not, whether you can prepare and plan what you're going to say, or really, I guess, trust your heart and speak from it. So this is what this is. Really mean expressing my gratitude from me and on behalf of others from our hearts. So all in all, thank you so much, Dashu and Lama, for bringing us the Dhamma with a light and strong touch, I think. Thank you so much for for you, Dashu, Lama, and the whole Sangha.
Great.
Thank you, Jeremy. Very much. And thank you.
Great.
Do you want to dedicate now?
No, I think I've said everything.
Oh,
Are we going to dedication? Yeah. We dedicate this puja to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. Chanchu samni rinpoche macha banam jejejik jaba nyamba mapadam kane kandip pelwasho. Chanchu samni rinpoche macha banam jejejik jaba nyamba mapadam kane kandip pelwasho. Chanchu samni rinpoche macha banam jejejik java nyamba mevadam kane kandi pelwasho. You who shine with the radiance of intelligence, skillful play. You who are a fertile field of excellent qualities. You manifest an ocean of Dhamma with each point clear and distinct. In all 10 directions the melodious sound of your song reverberates. You sing the songs of the deep meaning of the view and meditation. Genuine spiritual friend, may your feet continue their playful dance. We beg you to always remain. Satim yantam shingipadan shing. Chadan jam samadre sasanang. Takam samo guyan jochilin. Shenyen dam bashape takten sho. Thank you. I look forward to more of this.